time to water our plants. Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to my channel. So for those of us that live in the northern hemisphere, we're entering a lot of the cold and dark days of winter. When I was a child, I used to look forward to winter months. Ice skating and tobogganing over the weekend, a lot of fluffy white snow days, drinking hot cocoa by the fireplace. I'm just kidding, that never happened growing up. But now I look at winter through the lens of my plants and all I see are dark, cold, and a lot of gloomy days, and they're not looking forward to it. I'm not looking forward to it. But for the most part, the goal is really to just keep them alive and healthy so that way come spring and summer, they can take off and grow as much as they can again. Now, for those of you guys who's entering your first winter as a new plant parent, I have some words of encouragement. May the odds be ever in your favor. I'm just kidding. I'm here to also share with you guys a few of my care tips when it comes to caring for your plants through the winter. I've gone through a few of them and honestly, they are a learning experience. Some have been good, some have been bad. For the most part, they've been quite successful. So with that said, I want you guys to keep a few things in mind. The care tips that I do share for you guys is relative and applicable to my environment and my location. So use it as a base and adjust it according to your environment and your location. And what I mean by that is, for example, I live here in Toronto, Canada. Hold on, I did some drawings for this one. Ta-da! Okay. So I live here in Toronto, Canada. And say, for example, you live in California, like Sharina, or maybe you live in Anchorage, Alaska. The shortest day of the year is December 21st, and the longest day of the year is June 21st. So that is the length of time the sun is out for. On December 21st here in Toronto, the sun is only out for maybe about 8 hours and maybe like 40 minutes. In LA, it's about maybe 10 hours and, 20 minutes or something. But in Anchorage, Alaska, further north, is about maybe 5 hours that the sun is out for on December 21st. Now, on June 21st, it's opposite. It's during the summer solstice. So in Toronto, we get maybe about like 15, almost 16 hours of daylight. I think in maybe LA or something is probably closer to like maybe 18 hours and so on. So that is how the light changes based on your location, even though we're all still part of the northern hemisphere. Now, the further north you are, obviously temperature will change, gets colder, and the further south you are, the temperature will also change. So keep that in mind as we talk about a few of the care tips, because this is important for you guys to adjust according to your environment and your location. So let's talk about the first care tip. The number one source of energy the plants needs is obviously lighting. I think it is the most important thing when it comes to the health of your plant. Obviously, you guys know I have a large south-facing window. You now know that the daylight changes as we enter the winter months, and that's because the sun is further away, or our part of the sun, our part of the world, which is the northern hemisphere. Oh, hold on, let me show it. I did another drawing for this one. Okay. The reason why lighting is obviously shorter is because northern hemisphere, the earth tilts away from the sun. So it's further away, therefore the light and the daylight is shorter. And in addition to that, they aren't as strong because we're not as close to the sun. Unlike the southern hemisphere, our friends in Australia and New Zealand, they're now entering their spring and summer months. They're closer to the sun, so they get those long daylights and a stronger sunlight. So pretty much what it means for a lighting perspective is we got to maximize the amount of light that our plants get. So there's a few ways to do that. The first thing I do is I actually like to move a lot of my plants closer to my window. You guys know I have a large south-facing window, so I typically will move a lot more of my plants closer to that one, especially a lot of those smaller and juvenile plants. Because if you have limited space on your plants, then you kind of want to prioritize it. Move a lot more of your baby and smaller leaf type of plants closer to the window, especially those like bright loving plants as well too, right? So those are the two things to keep in mind. Bright loving plants and smaller leaf foliages. Because your bigger plants, like a bird of paradise, even though they're bright loving, they have a huge amount of foliage, so they can capture more of that energy. And they are more likely to survive your winter versus like a smaller and juvenile baby plant. So keep that in mind when you are prioritizing which plant to move closer to the window, especially if you have limited window space. The only thing to keep in mind as well too is make sure that there are no cold drafts or cold air coming in from the outside inside. So if there's any cracks in your window, you want to make sure you seal that. And also avoid placing them close to any of your air vents where heat or cold can come through. So you kind of just want to keep that in mind. Now, other ways to obviously maximize the amount of lighting that your plant will get is clean your windows. any dirt or debris that's on that window is pretty much blocking that sunlight and that energy from coming through. We already know that the daylight is shorter and the sun isn't as strong because we're further away from the sun. But in addition, like for example, here in Toronto, we get a lot of cloudy days. So it's already blocking that sunlight from coming through. So if you have any dirt or gunk on your window, that's also preventing the sun from coming through and, you know, having your plant kind of capture that energy. So clean your windows. Same thing with trying to clean the dust off your leaves. Any dirt or layer of dust that's on there will prevent it from obviously capturing the sun's energy, whatever it can. So clean your leaves, you know, every 3 weeks or so. It's also a great practice to kind of just check for pests. So that's why I also clean my leaves even during the summer months. So those are just a few ways to maximize the amount of natural light that your plant can get. Now, if you don't get a lot of natural light, what you can do is get a few grow lights. I use this one from Soltech Solution. It's in my dining room area, so I use it as kind of a dining room / grow light. And for the most part, it's mostly my plants that use these lights. But what I like about this one, it is quite strong, has a good aspect ratio and diameter. You can adjust this up or down. And also, it's quite design friendly. However, if you don't want to spend that kind of cash, what you can use is these light bulbs from Miracle LED. I've used these quite a bit. I actually use this to replace the light bulb in my bathroom because I don't get any light there at all. And I have a couple plants I started to put in there. Or what you guys can do is just replace, you know, maybe a lamp with this light bulb. And you guys can do that, and it works really well. Or if you don't want to replace your, you know, light bulb in your lamp, what you can do is get one of these like socket cords that you guys can just hang here in the corner like you see, and that works really fine as well too. So you can get that type of grow light. And normally the way I use grow light during the winter months is I don't actually leave them on, you know, all day and all night long. What I do is I extend the light similar to what they normally would get in the summer months. So I spoke about that during, you know, the summer months. You get maybe about 15 hours of, you know, daylight. So what I like to do is kind of mirror that. So if the sun is out here for about 8 hours or 6 hours, what I like to do is turn on my light for an additional, like, you know, 9 or 10 hours. So in the evening is when I'll turn on the light before the sun sets. That way, you know, they can kind of somewhat mirror that daylight that they were used to during the summer months. So that's how I use grow lights. Again, it depends on really your natural lighting that you get and whether you don't get any lighting at all during the winter months. You know, if you live in Loyenberg, I think Norway, the closest city to North Pole, they get 0 daylight during the months of December and January. So imagine that. But pretty much that's how you kind of use a grow light. Personally, for me, that's how I use it. So those are just a few ways you can maximize the lighting for your plant. The next thing I want to talk about is humidity. Most of our tropical houseplants come from a place that has high humidity. Humidity is pretty much the presence of water vapors that's in the air. When water, hold on. When water evaporates, right? Say this is the ocean. Here's my little palm tree. When the sun's hitting that, water evaporates, right? Creating water vapors in the air, and the more water vapors there are in the air in a given area, the higher the humidity gets. So keep that in mind when we talk about the different ways you can create humidity for your home. So you can imagine places like in Florida that's closer to large bodies of water plus warm temperatures. They get higher humidity than, you know, someone like me who lives here in Toronto, Canada. It gets cold in the winter, so there's not as much, you know, evaporation that's taking place, and therefore that's, you know, that's why the air is a lot drier. My skin will start drying up, my lips get all chapped up, and my plants, especially those humidity loving plants, they will act up. They will get brown tips and edges, and some of them will throw a fit. So what you want to do is kind of create that humid environment around them. So there's a few ways to do that. One is to obviously invest in a humidifier. There's a lot of options out there, everything from features to price range. I got these ones from Elect Homes. I got 2 of them. I got a black one and a white one. The white one's more of the newer model. It's top fill, but both are similar sizes and both do the same thing. They have dual nozzle, which creates dual mist, and you can control the level of the mist, the humidity, and set these on timers. So really good humidifier. I like this one. And you can also have a cool and warm mist, but for the most part, I just leave it on cool mist. So the one thing to keep in mind with humidifiers like this is they're not enough to obviously, you know, increase the humidity in your entire room. It really does depend on the size of your room, but, you know, somewhere close to them will be a little bit more higher humidity than if you were further back. So what I typically like to do is move a few of my plants closer to that humidifier, or move that humidifier to, you know, where my plants need them, and you know, turn it on, and around those plants will create that humid environment, because again, there's water vapors that's surrounding that area, and that's just creating the humidity. So, but you know, if my room was a little smaller and maybe I got a couple of this, then the entire humidity would obviously increase in that space. You guys want to also get yourself a hygrometer that will measure not only your temperature, but also the humidity in the area. And you can take this portable, so you can always measure it in different parts of your room. Now, if you don't want to invest in a humidifier or don't have one, what you can always do is the old pebble water and tray trick. And this is great because, like, again, you're creating a small body of water around that plant. You know, you're putting a tray, you're putting some pebbles, pouring some water on it, place that plant on top of it, and as that water evaporates, it's creating those vapors and again creating that humidity dome around that plant. It's a great effective tool. You know, it might not give you the highest humidity, unlike a humidifier, but it will still work. You can also mist your plants. However, I would say this is the least effective way of creating humidity because it's not constant enough and it won't be consistent. So you're gonna have to keep misting it if you want to create a consistent humidity. And if you are gonna mist, I would say avoid misting the leaves directly because sometimes that will create powdery mildew and fungus on your plants, and you don't want that. So you want to kind of just, you know, mist around it, if that makes sense. Now, another thing you can do is also get yourself a couple of greenhouses or one or two, like the ones behind me. These are from the ones I set up in my last video from IKEA, where I did a whole, you know, plant room makeover. If you haven't checked that video out, I'm gonna link it right here. But a greenhouse is great because it's a smaller enclosure, unlike your bedroom, which has a lot of plants. So you can trap that humidity more and keep it consistent pretty much all day and all night. And it's great because you actually don't even need to put a humidifier in a greenhouse. You can put the pebble and tray and water trick in there, a couple of those, and it'll be enough to kind of create a humid environment. And again, because of the enclosed area, it like traps the humidity. So that's why I actually think a greenhouse is probably better than getting a humidifier, to be honest. And if you don't want to spend the cash on a greenhouse like this, you can always get one of those plastic green ones. I used that actually earlier in the year, was my first greenhouse, and I swear, like, a lot of my plants I put in there, they're thriving, they are great. So it's a great way to make sure a lot of your juvenile or more precious plants will make it through the winter months. But yeah, so that's kind of ways to obviously create humidity for your plants. Now let's talk about watering. Now when it comes to watering your plants, you guys know my rule of thumb when it comes to watering my plants is I only water when the soil is dry. And when you think about how your plants kind of react and grow during the summer months, during the winter months, because there's not as much sun and the daylight is shorter, not as strong, your plants actually aren't growing or using as much energy. So therefore, they don't necessarily need as much water as they normally would have during the summer months. So for example, my string of hearts, during the summer months, I would usually water this one a week and a half. So maybe about like every 10 days. However, during the winter months, I actually, you know, water this one maybe every 2.5 weeks, sometimes up to 20 days. A snake plant or my aloe vera, a plant that I usually don't even water often during the summer months, you know, maybe every 20 days in the summer months. In the winter, it'll be like every 30, maybe 40 days. And even then, the amount of water is a little bit less than what I normally give during the summer months. So you definitely want to make sure you cut back on your watering when it comes to watering your plants during the winter months. And if you do find it challenging to tell if your soil is completely dry, using your finger or lifting the pot, get yourself a moisture meter. They're really handy tools. They will tell you exactly when to water your plant depending on how dry or wet the soil is. And they can go further deep into the soil, unlike your finger. You know, sometimes can only go up to like, you know, 2 or 3, depending on how deep you want to get in there. But at that point, you're kind of messing up with the roots. With a moisture meter, it's quite thin of a, you know, prongs here to go in and not necessarily damage the roots. So that's a great way to tell when to water your plant. And when it comes to watering your plants, the one thing to keep an eye out for is make sure that water drains through. If it is not draining through the bottom of the drainage holes, you might want to aerate or loosen up the soil by getting a chopstick and loosening the first layer at the top. And what I sometimes will do is I'll actually, you know, poke the bottom drainage just to make sure it's free of any, you know, packed dirt in there, so that way the water can flow nicely. Because again, it's going to take a while for your plants to actually dry up when you do water your plant, because, you know, it's the winter month. They're not absorbing that water as much. The sun isn't out there as strong to evaporate the air. So you want to make sure there's no excess water in that soil. And because that will create a lot of, obviously, issues, right? Root rot, and next thing you know, your plant is off to plant heaven, right? So you want to avoid that. Now let's talk about pest control and management. Some people assume that just because winter is here, your plants will not attract any pests. That's actually not the case. I think it's actually worse during the winter months. I remember my first winter with my Monstera from Walmart. It grew beautifully during the summer months. And then throughout the winter, I noticed it started to decline, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. I thought maybe it was just a lack of light. Maybe it just needs some fertilizer, maybe it needed repotting because it was so massive. So I tried to do all those things, and at the end of it, it wasn't the case. Because in the morning I would leave for work and it was dark, right? I couldn't really see. And when I would come home, it was still dark and I couldn't really see what was going on. So one weekend I brought it under a bright light, and that's when I discovered there was a whole bunch of thrips on it. It was so infested that I was surprised that that plant survived just by cutting it only. But what happened there is obviously once you have any kind of pest, whether it's aphids, spider mites, or thrips, you need to kind of assume your plant will always get that, despite how much times you treat your plant. Because I treated my plant, and come following, summer or the winter, they came back, right? So I've gone to a point now where I have to stay on top of my pest control and management. So whenever I water my plant during the winter, I actually take that opportunity to spray them down with my N-All solution. So it's a concentrated mix where I mix 50 milliliters of this into a 1 liter spray bottle, and I'll spray all of the leaves, the top leaves, the under leaves, all the petiole, the branches, and even the first layer of the soil. And then I would just let it dry up before I place it back to their location. So that's typically what I would do whenever I would water my plant during the winter months. In the summer, I would also do something similar, but because I'm watering more often in the summer, I'll do it maybe every other time I water my plants. But what I learned now is, if you have plants, there's just no way that you will never experience pests. So for me, once you have thrips, it's very, very hard for them to get rid of. They thrive off dry and environment. That's another reason why you should get increase the humidity, because they don't like humid environment. But so that is my thing when it comes to pest control and management. Stay on top of it. Don't get lazy. If you don't have access to this N-All solution, you can get one that's ready to spray already, or this concentrated one. You can always make your own homemade one. I'll link an ingredients or recipe in the description below, so definitely check that out. So those are my tips when it comes to winter care for your houseplants. Again, maximize the amount of lighting they get, increase that humidity, cut back on your watering, stay on top of your pest control and management. And the only thing I would probably suggest is, avoid repotting your plant if you can, because repotting your plant will typically put them in shock. And when the sun isn't out as long, or they're not in an active growth stage, they're gonna have a hard time bouncing back. So avoid repotting your plant if you can. And again, these care tips are obviously applicable to my environment and my climate. Use this information and adjust it based on your climate and your environment. And honestly, the best way to really learn is to go through the experience, regardless whether you make a mistake or not. Good or bad is just part of being a plant parent. So with that said, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, learned a thing or two, had fun, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.